Now we're going to use the standard skirt block here to create a flared pattern. So we're going to use the darts on the skirt here, and we're going to close them up and throw fullness into the hem. Two darts in the back, and we're going to use one dart in the front and create a flared silhouette. Here's the flared silhouette with no darts in the front or no darts on the back. And I've inserted the zip into the side seam of this skirt, and the zip always goes into the left hand side seam on any garment. So left hand side in wear. As you're wearing, your zip always goes in the left hand side of a woman's garment or the centre back. So there's the flared silhouette, which you've just created using the skirt block. Okay, so now to create the flared skirt, we're going to draw around the skirt block, and what we're going to do is we're going to actually close up these two big darts in the back and introduce the fullness into the hem. So I've already drawn around the skirt block and I've cut it out. So what I do here is I've marked on my darts. Always remember to mark on the centre back, and I'm dropping a line from the bottom of both darts. Okay, so what I'm doing here now, I'm actually taking my scissors, I'm cutting out the dart inlays. We're no longer going to have these, they go straight into the bin. And I'm now going to cut up these lines here, just to the bottom of the dart. Can you see? Oh, it's just cut. I've cut it apart. I always like to try and keep it hanging together with 1 millimetre of paper. So what I'm doing, here we go. Guys, I'm closing the darts over and I'm taping them. So by closing up the darts, what I'm doing is I'm actually throwing fullness and flare into the hem. So I'm closing up the darts. So what we need to do now is stick this onto another piece of paper. So I've opened up the flare and the hem. So I've got another piece of paper. And now I'm laying the back pattern here on the piece of paper. Closed up the darts, I've got the flare into the hem, and I'm sticking it down onto another piece of paper. So all these sections here become flare. Okay, so now I take my French curve, or my pattern master in this case, and I'm just going to join up between these sections. Okay. And we always want a little bit of extra flare on at the side seam of our skirt, so we can add on an extra 2.5 centimetres of spring at the side seam. So I'm extending the pattern out like that by 2.5 centimetres only. And with a straight line, I'm connecting that bit of spring, which gives that little bit of extra flare at the side seam, into the hip level of the skirt. So I'm connecting that line into the hip line to nothing, basically. So now I need to cut that or add on seam allowances now, and then my pattern would be complete. But now I've got to flare out the patterns, the pattern on the front of the skirt. But first of all, let's see how much flare I put into the back here. So I'm just measuring it across the bottom here. So it's approximately 7 centimetres there, and 6.5 centimetres there of flare. Now, one of the things you've got to remember whenever you're actually creating flare on a skirt, whatever amount of flare you create on the back of the skirt, you must also create the same amount of flare in the front, otherwise the garment will not be balanced. So now we're going to create the flare in the front of the skirt. So I've drawn around the front skirt block, and this time we've just got one dart here to close to create the flare, and that's not going to be enough, I don't think. So I use the same principle again. I take and I drop a line down from the bottom of the dart. So once again I use the same principle. I cut out the dart inlay, and I literally slash up the line that I've just drawn. Okay, I've just left it hanging together there by about 1 millimetre of paper. So now I close over the dart here, and I've got flare in the hem. Now, if I go back to the back of the skirt here, can you remember whenever we closed the 2 darts here, we flared out this first dart, we get 7 centimetres of extra fullness here in the hem, closed up the second dart near the side seam, I got 6.5 centimetres. So in total we now have 6.5 and 7 is 13.5 centimetres in the back of the skirt on that half. Now you might get different amounts because your pattern might be slightly different from mine, your block pattern that you're working with. So don't worry if you haven't got exactly the same amount. So I've added this figure to this figure. Now I know that I've got 13.5 centimetres of fullness extra at the hem of my skirt. So let me just very quickly measure the fullness here. Oh my goodness, I've just got about 10.5 centimetres. Well, that's not going to be enough. The garment's not going to be balanced. So what we've got to do, we've got to introduce another line to create fullness in. So you can create the line anywhere from the centre front here, and I'm just randomly placing my meter stick here. So I'm drawing another line. Just take that out of the way. And once again, I'm going to slash up the line. And I'm going to leave it hanging together by about 1 millimetre at the waist. So now, if I bring that back, like that, I'm now going to slash, I'm going to literally spread the pieces out so that now I get the total amount of, the same amount of flare on the front as what I have in the back. So I'm just going to get another piece of paper and stick this on and get it sorted. So I'm going to first of all stick the side seam down here. It's best that you start off with the side seam. And we know how much that's been flared out. So let me just measure that again to make sure that I'm doing this correctly. So I've got 10.5 centimetres of flare there, and we want 13.5 centimetres. So I've got this flare out this section here by another 3 to give us the same quantity of flare on the front as the back. That's a little bit too much. Ah, there's 3. So I'm now going to stick the pattern down. Okay, so now I've got exactly the same amount of flare on both the back and the front. So I've got, on my case, it's 10.5 here, and I've got 3 here. So once again, I take my pattern master and with my very gentle curve, I curve off the hem. And do you remember, guys, on the side seam here, we add an extra 2.5 centimetres of what I call spring. So whatever we do on the back, we've got to do exactly the same thing on the front. So I'm going to just measure out here for an extra 2.5 centimetres, and I'm going to bring the spring into the hip line, as I did. Okay, so now, I say you've got to add on the seams. Well, I've already created the pattern for the seams on this one. I've drawn around it. So here I've got my back. Okay, I want to create a full back pattern, so I'm putting the zip on the side seam. So I've got my full back pattern created. I've added a centimetre seam allowance here at the waist. I'm going to insert an invisible zip into this garment, so that's going to be just a centimetre seam. You insert invisible zips with me already, so you know how to do that. And because the hem is curved here, I've just put a centimetre hem allowance on it. So I've labelled my patterns. It's a flared skirt, it's the size 12. Because we want one back, we're cutting one. We're cutting the full back. And I've put on the grain line here and the title of the pattern. And I've done exactly the same thing for the front. So, again, centimetre seam allowance at the waist, centimetre at the side seam, and because we're putting an invisible zip into this, because in the skirt on the left hand side seam, and because the hem is curved, it is a centimetre hem turning on the curve. And once again, I've labelled the pattern centre front grain line, and the title of the pattern is a flared skirt. We're cutting a full front, so we need one of those, and we know it's the front. So now we're going to create the pattern for the waistband. So now we're going to create the pattern for a waistband for the skirt. So we need it's going to be a piece of fabric that's going to wrap around the waist. So we need to take the measurement of the waist of the skirt. So watch what I'm doing here. I'm measuring precisely on the seam allowance, the measurement. And here it is 17 centimetres. So I've done that on the back. And now I'm doing exactly the same thing on the front. So it is approximately 16.5 centimetres, and I've written that on the pattern. So what we know, guys, is that half of the front here is 16.5 and half of the back is 17. So we want to create a complete band to go around the waist. So what I need to do here we know these are both half patterns, so we're going to double them. So in this case, I'm going to add 16 and a half and 17. And that's going to give me 33 and a half centimetres. And that's only half of the skirt. So what we're going to do is multiply that figure by 2. So multiply 33.5 by 2, and that is going to give me 67 centimetres. So I need a band that's 67 centimetres to go around the waist of this skirt. So what I'm doing here is I'm starting off by drawing just a straight line. Okay. Oh, I need to go to my felt tip so you can see it, guys. So I'm just drawing a straight line, and the length of that line is going to be 67 centimetres. So I'm just going to make sure it is 67 centimetres. Now, we want the waistband to lap over, so we've got to add an extension of 5 centimetres here for an extension. So we're adding on 5 here. Okay. Now the depth of the waistband is whatever depth you really want. In this case, I've been using some fusible interlining. So in this case, I've been using some fusible interlining, and it's got 3 perforations in it, and I've already fused it onto a piece of calico. So what these do, they help you with the sewing process. Whenever you sew the waistband on, that folds over and that folds over to the top of the waistband, and that folds under as well. So the interlining in this case, in my case, has preset the depth of the waistband. The depth of this waistband is 2.5 centimetres whenever it's finished. Now, so I've got to make this waistband fold over, so it's going to be 5 centimetres. So 2.5 and 2.5 is 5. Okay. And the waistband's going to fold over. And here we had to add on the extra bit for the extension. Okay, so the actual waistband would lap over. So now what we've got to do is just add on a centimetre seam around this and cut it out. So here I've added my centimetre seam around the waistband. And you're saying, well, why is it a centimetre? Well, it's a centimetre because you've added a centimetre at the waist of the skirt. So the 2 seam allowance have to align and match. So I've given the pattern a title. It's a waistband. It's size 12, and you need to cut out one of these, and you need to fuse interlining onto it. And the grain line on any garment will always go vertically. So there's the waistband going around the waist of someone. So the grain line will be located in this position. So there's my 5 centimetre extension for the button, and I put notches in here. So let's just look at that on the mannequin now.
2, 1.
Okay, so I've actually sewn the waistband onto my skirt. So what needs to happen is that extension here goes underneath whenever you're sewing it on here. Okay, so now what I want you to do is I want you to use your skirt block to create a full-scale flared skirt like this, and I want you to make it up. And I am going to go through the process of making this up with you on canvas. And you can make it up because you already know how to sew on a zip. You did that in your bag. And you also know how to attach a waistband because you also did that in your bag.